Hey y'all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive. And today we'll be doing a review of the 1985 book by Nancy B. Reich, Clara Schumann, The Artist and the Woman. Nancy B. Reich, I think fair to call her one of the most important musicologists of the last century or so. Got her PhD from New York University and initially started with studying the concept of computers and machine learning and how they might incorporate themselves into music making back in the 1960s, which I think is really interesting and certainly kind of ahead of its time. After she got her doctorate in the early 70s, her focus and her lectures centered heavily around the idea of female composers, which at the time was a rather nascent field of study, in much the same way that I think women's rights was kind of a nascent field of study at that time, which I kind of talk about in my Ellen Carroll Du Bois suffrage review in that book. But in any case, so her lectures were very well known, and her biography of Clara Schumann, which was published in 85, as I said, is probably, and has been cited as such by the New York Times, the first major academic biography of a female composer in existence. There might be some biographies of someone like Hildegard of Bingen that are older than this. But Hildegard is someone who kind of transcends the idea of composer because she's kind of a multifaceted figure in the history of antiquity, I suppose. So really, this Clara Schumann work is a really important piece and a foundational piece towards the reevaluation, not just of Clara herself, but of many female composers, both from that era and from earlier and later periods. After the publication of this book, the public interest in Clara Schumann increased immensely to the point where she's now, I think, regularly taught in music history classes and put on a much more equal pedestal to her famous husband, Robert Schumann, compared to what she was in the past. And then you have the revival of interest in composers like Fanny Hensel and Amy Beach, people like that. So really, this is an important work. I should say I'm reviewing the revised edition from 2001. And I think it is a phenomenal book for kind of pulling apart the life of Clara. If you're not familiar with her story, she was kind of a prodigious child pianist at first. That is how she met her future husband, Robert Schumann. And the result after their meeting is one of the great, quote unquote, great love stories in the history of classical music. But it's one that is a little bit tortured as well, very tortured, in fact. There is a struggle for control between Robert and Clara's father, Friedrich, both of whom were, essentially trying to gain sole custody, as it were, of Clara for various different reasons. And what I appreciate about this book is that it really paints just how much of Clara's life, for the first half of her life, was completely controlled by these two men on some level or another. And that control was in part because of her genuine devotion to them. As much as you could argue that she saw the flaws in these people, and she certainly did, I think there is a genuine level of respect there that she had for her father, that sort of prevented her from leaving. There was a genuine affection for Robert that prevented her from sticking with her father, and it just becomes this kind of impossible choice. And it turns into a very ugly situation, and it's worth reading about because even outside of a gossip standpoint, it really informs all of these people as artists, and the kind of direction of their music going forward. Now, I think Clara comes across very in a very three-dimensional way here. I think she is someone that, as I said, is very much a victim of the life dominated by her father and her husband. And I think because of that, there is a sense of insecurity that exists throughout this narrative. And she will lash out at people at times. There's examples of her lashing out at Brahms, for instance, who the two of them were famously very close, although the rumors of them being in a romantic relationship don't seem to have much weight to them, if any at all. Purely platonic stuff. But yeah, I think the overall portrait is she is someone who, like I said, started as a concert pianist and sort of had to put her career to the side a little bit, although Reich makes a point of saying not as much as people thought, when she became married, when she became a mother. And it takes more of a backseat, but she's still performing throughout her time as a mother and as eventually Robert Schumann's caretaker as he slid into the abyss that was his battle with mental illness, presumably a battle with syphilis, as we've come to learn in the last few decades. And then after Robert passes away in the mid-1850s, Clara then goes back on the road because she wants to support herself completely without being reliant on anybody. And she becomes this dynamite pianist again, who becomes acclaimed as a virtuoso on the level of someone like a Liszt or someone like that. And if not Liszt, then close, which is interesting because she apparently couldn't stand Liszt. But that's an aside. So I think this book balances everything really well. It's split into two parts, as a lot of academic biographies of composers are. You have the biography at the first section, and then the kind of discussion of her works makes up a lot of the second part. I think it's interesting that the second half of the book is a quote-unquote thematic discussion. I think the reason that they make this choice, the reason that Reich makes this choice, is because certain topics, like her relationship with Brahms, for instance, would not fit super well into the narrative of the biography, which I suppose you could probably argue either way. I think it works the way that Reich does it here. And what I like is, this is an academic biography in every sense, but this is a very accessible one. This is an academic biography that knows that it might be consumed by a popular audience. And because of that, it is not willing to get itself lost in the weeds. It doesn't assume too much of its audience. And for that reason, I think this is why Reich and Clara's story have transcended the world of purely academia to become more well-known among the general populace. I'm not going to claim that Clara Schumann is a household name, but chances are, if most people have heard of a female composer in the Western classical tradition, then they have probably heard of Clara Schumann. I haven't even talked about her pieces that much. Admittedly, the compositions are a little bit more of an aside, at least how they're portrayed here, because there actually aren't a ton that exist. But what we get, again, towards the end of that second part, is a solid analysis of everything that she did, kind of breaking them apart piece by piece, explaining where she drew her influences from, and things like that. But Clara's legacy, for the most part, appears to be as a performer and really as someone who was incredibly self-sufficient. You kind of have this opposite effect of someone like Fanny Hensel, Fanny feeling like someone who never really was allowed to blossom in the way that she could. And with Clara Schumann, even though her compositions were never released to nearly the same acclaim as those of her husband's, as a performer, she transcended a lot, and she gained that agency to kind of make her own decisions, and she gained that kind of cultural power, which was very rare. And that's an important story. And I think that's why it makes sense that if there was anybody who was going to be subject to that first female composer biography, at least in an academic sense, it would be Clara. So, this is a phenomenal book. This is a very important book if you were reading anything about the history of Western classical music, history of the Romantic era, certainly the history of female composers and female artists. I think this is a really important read. It is a tastefully done read. As I said, it is three-dimensional. It doesn't sweep anything under the rug. And for that, I can't help but highly recommend it. It is a terrific book, and would be one of my first choices to recommend if you were looking to explore any of those avenues. So, with that, thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. As always, more reviews are to come. Hit the bell to get notifications and tell a friend as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive.